You mentioned how CTV has empowered small to medium-sized advertisers that might not otherwise have been able to afford TV to move into TV, right? And what used to scare them away, in addition to the old school way of buying, was also the fact that, you know, the production cost of the ad was exorbitant. And so simultaneously, you sort of got this idea like, oh, you know, for certain brands, you can get away with sort of almost a smartphone shot ad, right? And with some minor levels of video editing, and it doesn't need to come off like a cheesy local TV spot, right? You can actually find a way to get that balance of production value, right? So at what point should marketers start to think about CTV? Like at what budget level do you think suddenly, if they're not considering it, they should add it to their potential media plans?
I think it varies from, company to company, what they want to get out of it. What we often tell people is like, once you start to feel you've maxed out your social video audience, once you feel like, okay, we've sort of hit everybody on Instagram who we're going to hit. And it also has a prestige factor. Like no matter, when your brand has a TV commercial, there's a prestige factor to it. You seem real. You seem much more legit than if you're just something on Instagram, and that counts for something too.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm pleased to be here today with Alan Wolk, who is the co-founder and lead analyst for TVREV. I'd love to get the origin story actually for TVREV, because it's always fascinating when folks decide there's enough of white space in a category that they have to start a firm to address it. So why don't we start with the origin story, Alan?
Yeah, sure. So TVREV actually started up, it was going to be the sort of the publishing arm of a company called Brave Ventures, which was something that my friends Jesse Redness and David Beck started up with, of all people, Gary Vaynerchuk. And so TVREV, I had a blog, I had written a book about the TV industry, I did a lot of speaking, and I knew those guys very well for a number of years. And the idea of TVREV, initially we had sort of a bracket around the R. So it was revolution, evolution, and all that, because the TV industry was changing, but it changes very, very slowly. So this is back in about 2015 or so. And everybody was very interested in, where things were going, how the move to streaming was happening, how we were going to monetize this, where advertising fit in. And other than a couple of Wall Street guys, there really weren't too many people who were paying close attention to it. So we really had sort of a white space there. I mean, you had some people who were very into sort of the ad tech part of it, and some people who were very into the content part of it, but nobody who was sort of in that middle ground of how it was all fitting together. And, we started publishing, and then we turned it into a consulting business as well. At one point, I forgot what year it was exactly, but 2018 maybe, Jesse and David, went over to Turner, had been a big client. And then Jason DeMata, who's a good friend of mine, who also runs a company called Fabric Media, he was working with us a lot. And then Jay came on as the other person who's running TVREV. And we built it into business. We started doing reports around, key topics in the industry, whether it was ACR measurement or linear, how addressable worked on linear and streaming, and everything is sort of in that intersection. We got more and more subscribers, followers. Our news, we launched a weekly newsletter. It's now we have 3 different newsletters. They have a subscription base of about 55,000 people, and it's fairly evenly split between people who are in ad agencies, at brands, at TV network streaming services, MVPDs, and in ad tech. So, it's a lot of very senior level people. I'm always surprised when who tells me that they read it. We get a lot of investors and a lot of people from outside the U.S. too who are interested, because the U.S. TV industry is really kind of leading the charge internationally in terms of streaming. So that is our origin story.
Great. Congrats on that. Thanks, Alan.
Yeah.
I noticed you did a session at Advertising Week New York recently, or maybe it was even more than one session. So, what did you cover in the sessions topically, and what was the sort of pearls of wisdom that you shared, and also that you learned while you were up on stage doing the panel?
Right. So the panel, so we observed a two-part thing where I did a little presentation about our most recent special report, which was called Faster Than New Cable, which is about the free ad-supported streaming TV, which I will actually, the one thing I can brag about, I actually came up with that term. It's going to be on my tombstone, but sort of wild to see it take off. And that refers to services, whether it's, Pluto TV, Tubi, the Roku channel, Vizio Watch Free Plus, LG channel, Samsung TV Plus, all of those free services, which have really kind of taken off, much to everyone's sort of surprised at how quickly they took off and how popular they've become. And and the report was basically about how they serve the function that cable news served, that cable TV served back in the day. It's sort of a big reach extension vehicle. It's a lot of, sort of niche content, things that people will watch for long periods of time. And it's a great complement to the SVOD services. And one of the things we talked about was in my presentation, was about the confusion that people have around all of the nomenclature, like what is AVOD, what is SVOD, and all that. And basically, the pearl of wisdom there was that, there's basically two business models, free and not free. So you have FAST, and the FAST have both linear channels and on demand. And then you have the not free, which is subscription or SVOD, and they also have on demand. And a lot of them are starting to have linear now too. And that was something that we learned, that everybody assumes that, especially for their library content, they're all going to roll out linear channels, so they can run ads on them as well. And that was that. And then we talked to Mike O'Donnell, runs is Chief Revenue Officer at Vizio Ads, and Evan Edelman, who has a similar role at AMC Networks, just about what was going on. So AMC has launched a couple of networks on a couple of linear channels on the various FASTs, Vizio in particular, and sort of why they did that, given that they're a cable network, and what they were getting out of it, what they learned, why all this suddenly was so popular, and then basically how Vizio, because they own the software and the hardware, is able to help AMC drive traffic to from their home screen. Because when you turn on the TV, you have the Vizio Watch Free product as sort of the interface, and they are able to drive traffic to AMC, which then led into a bigger discussion about how the interface is really sort of where the big battle is happening now on TV. That's really going to be what controls it. What do you see when you turn it on? How does it help drive viewing? And then how does it, into advertising as well?
That's fascinating. Sort of the power of that splash screen, right? When you first get there. And, you use the term, I think, on your website and in some of your other content called the TV industrial complex. So my question about the TV industrial complex, is it fragmenting? Is it consolidating? Or is both happening at the same time?
A little bit of both, but more consolidation. We're starting to see, and I think we'll see even more consolidation. The biggest merger recently, of course, was Warner Brothers and Discovery, in which AT&T gave up the Warner Brothers franchise, which includes HBO. And they are moving, they are combining. So there's, instead of 9 big SVOD services, there's going to be 8, because they're going to, do a mashup of HBO Max and Discovery Plus. And, there's a lot of rumors about who else may sort of combine, especially around, Paramount, the broadcast networks, Paramount and NBCU. They've already done some joint ventures outside the US. There's a lot of legal issues here, but I think we're starting to see things kind of come together a little bit. And that's not surprising in any industry that you have. There's always that period, where you have a whole lot of players, and then suddenly they kind of, combine and get merged into each other until there's just, a few left. And it's just easy. It's a consumer preference thing too. Consumers are just, confused by too many options. And so the more you can get it down, and also economies of scale. So I think we are seeing the TV industrial complex, contract some, but it also is bringing in new players like Netflix and especially, Apple and Amazon and Google.
Right. No, it's been fascinating to watch. Obviously, when we were kids, right, TV, was tonnage, right? I mean, you really, GRPs were the way to go after TV, and they even named the day parts based on the kinds of advertisers, like soap operas being named after soap. And then within prime time, you thought about it. Oh, okay, what are the demographics and psychographics of that network or of that specific show? And that was sort of how the media buyers attacked, the opportunity of TV. Now, obviously, with CTV, advertisers are empowered to get much more precise, right? And the level of precision that they want runs the gamut. So what are the implications on the ecosystem as you sort of have the ability to continue to get tonnage with like Super Bowl spots or whatever, and you also have simultaneously the ability to be super precise as an advertiser? It seems like those two things can coexist, right? I mean, or maybe people are moving from one to the other. Where do you see that going?
Yeah, so it's very much a coexisting, and it really depends on the advertiser and what they want to achieve. So initially when CTV, sort of became a thing, everybody got all excited about all these sort of digital style targeting, characteristics that it has. The problem with that is that if you're Pepsi, your attitude is, well, my audience is everyone with a stomach, everyone with a mouth. Like, I don't really need to get that hyper targeted. And big brands looked at TV as a reach vehicle, and their attitude was, even so, if we're selling a razor and we hit some old lady, maybe she has a grandson and she's going to say, "Oh, that's the Gillette razor. I saw an ad. That's so nice that you have it," and that's a win for us because we want everybody to be aware of it. Or it even comes down to sort of a funny anecdote, I should say. Was talking a few years ago to a guy who had been a media buyer for many, many years. And he said, if I'm Mercedes, I want to put my ad in front of a guy who never in his life will be able to afford a Mercedes. Why is that? I said, no. So that when his brother-in-law buys one, he'll be impressed. And that's sort of the attitude of a lot of the big advertisers. At the same time, what's great about CTV is that it opens up the door to a lot of smaller advertisers who previously couldn't afford TV because it was, the money was too much for them. And you have especially a lot of DTC brands who have a very different thing. They actually want to sell something like, off of the TV. They want the TV commercial to sell something, and they can now track that. We ran this commercial. We have video assets from our Instagram, and we ran the commercial, and did it lead to a sale? Where was it in the funnel? As opposed to say, a Pepsi or a Nike just do it, which is broader, but they can also track that as well. They can look to see, okay, did it, we can do survey work and see if it increased brand image and all that. And we can start hitting we can also start geo-targeting, right? We can start hitting different regions if we need to heavy up in certain regions in order to get more reach. So for some brands, it's definitely a reach vehicle. The other thing that we're seeing, which is really interesting, is the rise of contextual targeting. And that solves a whole lot of problems that arose, privacy issues, right? Because instead of actually targeting people, which is tough because TV is a household, it's household viewing, it's a household device. You're targeting a type of content, and you can get a much broader reach. And also you can do it across all of these different fasts. So one of the issues that you have, which is I think is really interesting, is, in the old days, you had cable networks and they were available across all the different MVPDs. But in this new ecosystem, everybody will have their own, say, science fiction themed channel. Right. And they'll all be different. So it's not that easy to say, okay, I'm buying Sci-Fi Network across everybody. But if you're doing contextual targeting, you're able to say, okay, I want to reach people who want to watch, who are watching science fiction programming. And I can get them on these channels on Pluto, on these on Samsung, on these on LG, Vizio, et cetera, and get them across the whole, the whole ecosystem. And so that's another shift that we're seeing. But the amount of data that we have and the access to it is very, very different. And I think, brands are are realizing that the benefits of that and, moving away from that GRP based buy.
Yeah, that's great. You follow-up question on that is you mentioned how CTV has empowered small to medium-sized advertisers that might not otherwise have been able to afford TV to move into TV, right? And what used to scare them away, in addition to the old school way of buying, was also the fact that the production cost of the ad was exorbitant. And so simultaneously you sort of got this idea like, for certain brands you can get away with sort of almost a smartphone shot ad, right? And with some minor levels of video editing, and it doesn't need to come off like a cheesy local TV spot, right? You can actually find a way to get that balance of production value, right? So at what point should marketers start to think about CTV? Like at what budget level do you think suddenly, if they're not considering it, they should add it to their potential media plans?
I think it varies from company to company what they want to get out of it. What we often tell people is like, once you start to feel you've maxed out your social video audience, once you feel like, okay, we've sort of hit everybody on Instagram who we're going to hit, and it also has a prestige factor. Like no matter when your brand has a TV commercial, there's a prestige factor to it. You seem real. You seem much more legit than if you're just something on Instagram, and that counts for something too.
Yeah, that's a great point. The legitimacy factor, and I think part of the legitimacy factor is includes employees of the brand, including the CEO, right? Yes. It's part of why you used to see things like golf sponsorships, right, where it was more difficult to make the numbers work purely on a audience-based analysis, but there was prestige, right, and yes. Those kinds of things ended up being used in social media and reused. So one thing I've noticed Amazon doing, and I'm not sure if it's just my imagination or not, but I get the sense that Amazon, given the fact that they've got Prime and they've also got Freevee, which was the old IMDb TV, is they have the ability to sort of shift shows around based on how popular the show is. If they want to move it to Freevee, right, there it's ad supported, right? And so they can, to some extent, control supply. So do you think that they've been strategic about that, or do you think it's been ad hoc?
Oh, I think it's very strategic. Amazon is such an outlier in this space, too, because I don't think most people, I certainly could not tell you, do I subscribe to Amazon because I like the video programming or because I get free 2-day delivery? Right, yeah. It's a little bit of both. So you really can't look at their subscriber numbers in the same way as you do anyone else's. Right. At the same time, Amazon has this brilliant, has this incredible, value proposition where they know exactly what you bought. They, it's not what you search for like Google. It's not what you want people to think you like the way Facebook does. They know exactly what you bought. And the thing is that a lot of their advertising people don't realize it's advertising. It's just, oh, nice Mr. Bezos knows that I've watched a bunch of Dallas Cowboys games, and now he's put some Dallas Cowboys jerseys in my feed. That's so cool. Like, not even a clue that this is an ad, that someone paid for this. And so they really have that. And the same way, they've never really publicized Freevee. Like they've never, even back when it was IMDb TV, people didn't realize that it was a separate service and they weren't really sure what it was.
Who owns it?
Right. You would search on Prime and something would come up and it would say, okay, you can watch this for $1.99 or you can watch it for free here, and it wouldn't be like, now we're taking you to this new service that we have and you should come back to it and check it out and all that. So it's kind of like, all in one thing, but they run ads on it. And then, they also have sports, right? They have Thursday Night Football now, and that's even bigger because you're running those ads against Amazon's entire user base, anybody who's watching that Thursday Night Football. So it's a much bigger base. And then you can use those learnings to sort of drill down. And I do think that they move. In terms of production, certainly more than any of the other fasts, they have a lot more originals, and they've taken a bunch of shows like Bosch and things like that were popular on Prime and made sort of either prequels or sequels or some, variation, and put it on Freevee as a way to sort of, get people to watch it on that and to increase ad revenue as well. And the learnings and the data that they get from that too, because they know we ran this ad and then who went to Amazon and bought it.
Right. Well, obviously, the sort of elephant in the room with regards to moving towards fast is Netflix, right? With regards to moving towards ad supported. Now, some folks in the industry are saying the timing may not be perfect because if there's a recession going on and people are pulling back on spending, is that really the time you want to add inventory to the ecosystem? Creating more competition. So do you feel like there might end up being sort of a glut of inventory if they release too much of it at once, driving prices down across the ecosystem? Or do you think that the ecosystem can actually absorb a fair amount of inventory?
Oh, the latter, very much. I mean, there's the biggest complaint that we hear is that there's not enough inventory.
Interesting.
I mean,
Okay.
if you think about it, Kevin, the amount of advertising, on the FAST and then on the SVOD service is about less than half of what's available on linear TV. So there's not a whole lot, and it's only served, and there's not a whole lot of inventory, and it's only served up when someone is watching. It doesn't just sort of live with the show and go out there regardless. So it's only when someone is watching that it gets served up. Netflix is starting with no ad-supported subscribers. They're building it up. And they've gotten a lot of brands who want to, sort of see the halo effect. It's like, it's a very, it's sort of a premium streaming environment, and something that a lot of brands who may have previously, 20 years ago, put a lot of money into Friends and, and Seinfeld, now like, okay, this is the equivalent. This is where we're going to spend. But then you also have a lot of, you have their library content on there that people are going to run ads against, and so it can become a reach vehicle. And then there's a lot of rumors, or not so much rumors, but sort of speculation that Netflix may bid for the NBA. The rights to a lot of NBA games are up next year. And again, like I was saying with Amazon, that then gives you access to Netflix's entire user base, because anybody who, there's always going to be ads on sporting events. It'd just be boring if the announcers talk the whole time. So if you can get ads on NBA games, then you're suddenly looking at the 60 some odd million people who subscribe to Netflix, rather than whatever portion is just watching the ad free. So that's going to be huge as well.
Yeah, I'll be fascinated to see how that evolves. The way they're selling it now, at least to my knowledge, is it's more similar to old IO based packages, right?
Yeah,
which of course fits within the GRP style framework to some extent, but also you can also use alternate frameworks to think about it from a reach and frequency perspective. So people have been saying GRPs are dead for a while. Of course, it never seems to go away. So what's your thinking on are GRPs sort of going to remain? Are they sort of a permanent part of the video advertising ecosystem thinking, particularly for brands who want tonnage and reach? Or do you feel like it could really be replaced with a more of a reach and frequency based model?
I think down the road. So the thing about TV is it changes really slowly. So we talk about things changing. It's not like in 2 or 3 years, it's 5 or 10 years. So, linear TV is like, we talk about this a lot at TVREV. You constantly see the mainstream media talking about the massive wave of cord cutting. There really hasn't been a massive wave. It's been more like a slow leak, right? It's, 2 or 3% every year. Maybe this year it'll be 5 or 6%, but it's not like suddenly, tens of millions of people have fallen away. Most of the country still has some sort of cable TV package, some sort of pay TV package. And that's going to be judged by GRPs until it goes away. And that's always going to be a big reach vehicle. That's going to be the sort of thing brands say, okay, we want to reach as many people as possible. And then they're going to go to streaming, brands who are very concerned about, broad reach, and fill in that. It's called incremental reach, where they can say, who are we missing on linear? We can fill that in with CTV, and that's going to be all impression based. And then at some point it's going to flip. It's going to be who we missing on streaming. Oh, we can fill it in with linear. But that's going to be how it's measured. It's a lot easier to measure CTV that way because like I said, the ad is only seen when someone's watching TV. So it's pretty easy to measure that way. You can get, and it's also generally using ACR data, the automatic content recognition from smart TVs, and that's a much bigger database. LG and Vizio each have a little bit more than 20 million TV sets that they draw from. Samsung has probably closer to 50 million at this point. So it's a huge, compared to the 40,000 Nielsen household, it's it's not deterministic yet, but it's getting there. It's a huge database. And then the other piece is that a lot of brands are starting to look even beyond who watched it into, what did they do as a result of watching it? Did sales go up? Was there any sales lift? Sort of factoring in different things. The other thing, just to circle back with ACR, is, Nielsen measures the panel's measured every 15 minutes, viewing. But with ACR, which Nielsen also has through Grace Note, just not to leave them out, you can measure second by second. So you actually can know, okay, who watched the commercial to completion, who didn't, how many people did. That's the kind of metrics that brands are getting excited about now. They just want to know that they reach certain households and possibly certain, individuals within those households. So it's, you'll have both. And it really depends on what the brand wants to accomplish.
Yeah, you made me think back to, I think it's got to be 29 or 30 years ago at this point when I worked at McCann Erickson. And one of the senior people in the media department, I think it was somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but there was a strong core of truth to it. He said to me, at the right price, I'll buy any media, right? And I think the point he was trying to get across to me is that, every media that you could potentially buy is going to have a certain overlap with the target audience that's in your brief, right? And so the extent to which you can do the math and figure out what you paid for the people you really wanted versus what you paid for it overall and got all the others as gravy, right, along with the buy, that you could pretty much make the numbers work on almost any form of media. And for me, that was it made a real impression on me because it was like that aha moment that I had, okay, we have to think about everybody, the tonnage that you get. And then you have to look at the sub-segment of the group you really wanted to reach. Now, of course, in CTV, hypothetically, you could just go after the group you really wanted to reach and sort of remove the waste. Although, to your earlier point, aspirational brands want the waste too, right? Because they want the person to want that Mercedes, right? Even if they can't afford it right now, right? And so, is that precision the holy grail of CTV? Or do you think marketers will actually get themselves in trouble if they try to remove all the waste from their plans?
Yeah, I think it depends again who you are and what you're selling. If you're a big packaged goods brand, you want, or a car brand, you probably want as many people as possible. If you're selling something very specific, if you're a beauty brand that's selling specifically to young millennial women, teens and 20-somethings, then targeting, more precise targeting is not a bad thing. There's also, CTV is also sold different ways too, right? There's direct sales, there's guaranteed programmatic, open programmatic, and all that. So again, depending on what your goals are, is how you would use, is sort of how you would use it, and it's a lot easier to target. I mean, people, using CTV. One of the more interesting ways we've seen this and very appropriate today, is political advertising. So it used to be, if you were a candidate, in a down ballot race, and a House race or state, legislative race, and you were in an area like New York or LA, and you wanted to buy TV, you had to buy the entire DMA. You couldn't, on linear TV, you couldn't sort of separate out. But with streaming, you can very much say, okay, I just want to buy the people who live in my, state legislative district, and and it's a lot cheaper and more effective.
And I guess you could take that to the next level and just focus on the dense swing voter, regions, right? If you really wanted to be more precise. So it'll be interesting to see how many of the political advertising organizations are going to take advantage or taking advantage of that level of precision. Any thoughts on that?
A lot of them seem to be already. We have some stats for a company called Mad Hive that we do some work with, and yeah, it seems like a lot of them are moving to that. I mean, the other thing that you can do with it is right now, if you want on linear, most of the political ads wind up on news shows because the assumption is that that's where people are thinking about the news. But you can also take, say you're a Republican candidate, you can say, okay, find me households that watch a lot of Fox News, and we'll target them on something else, something that's appropriate, but not on the news show, so that our ad will stand out because it will be the only, one of the only political ads rather than, one of 8 in a row.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Back in, when cable proliferated, right, and for a short period of time, there was like a glut of inventory. That's when infomercials had their first wave, right? A DRTV, right? Long form DRTV, short form DRTV. Do you feel like they're having a renaissance as well at the moment?
Yeah, I think we will certainly see a lot more of that. That comes, partly from these DTC brands whose commercials on social media in some ways are almost infomercials, where again the goal is to buy something at the end of the commercial. That's what they want you to do. They don't want you to kind of go, oh, that's nice. And there's a need for a lot of this content. I also think we're going to start seeing more branded content too, that a lot of companies may come in and say, okay, we're going to create our own, if you're a liquor brand, you may create like a, sort of a lifestyle channel or something like that, or your sporting goods manufacturer, do some sort of, sporting, because there's so much, availability and so much need for content right now that if you can do it correctly, which is tough, granted, and a lot of advertisers don't want to just make, content, but, we always go back to, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, right? It was an incredibly popular show back in the day, and it was branded content from a life insurance company, and, it worked. And so I think we will see a lot more of that sort of stuff, and also a lot of, of infomercials, because there is just, fairly unlimited space right now, and there's, slots to be filled. And if you do it correctly, people will watch it. I mean, that's the thing too, that with the infomercials, someone could not, there was no escaping from it. But with streaming, there is escape. Like you choose what you watch most of the time. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. Given that power of choice, I guess it raises the bar for creative in general, right? Is when you had to sit through the commercials. People had to be patient even with the bad ones. Right now, if your commercial's not good, it could get skipped, or they could just use that if it's unskippable, they'll use it as an excuse to go do something else.
Yes.
Do you agree that it sort of raises the bar in creative as well for marketers?
Oh, very much. And and I think a lot of them are up to it. And like, we always go back to, like, on Instagram, a lot of times the ads are as interesting as anything else that's in your feed. So why shouldn't TV be the same?
The sort of last bastions of sort of real-time consumption of content really were sports and news, or are sports and news. Do you feel like there are different opportunities for marketers to take advantage of that versus the stuff that's sort of, historical content, or other content that doesn't need to be real time?
Yeah, I mean, I think sports, like I was saying before, sports on streaming is huge because, people don't realize, like, Apple runs at TV commercials now when they run Major League Baseball games. So does Amazon with football. So it gives you the opportunity to reach the entire audience of whatever streaming service that you have. We think that the FASTs are going to start doing a lot more of, like, sort of, smaller sports, smaller, college divisions as well. Something like lacrosse may wind up on a FAST service rather than on, Netflix. But, that's a huge opportunity right there. And the same thing with news, to reach a much broader audience with a message. Because, again, those are two things, especially news, where you really have, everybody sort of, you get a broad audience. You don't just get that sort of niche audiences on that. And then the question is, how much, that to a large degree keeps people on, paying for pay TV, because especially sports, and, how much longer does that hold?
Absolutely. We'll find out. The other
Yes.
thing that's a big question mark is just 2023 in general, right? Obviously, it could end up being a rough year for the economy. It could be a rough year beyond just the economy. But what has you excited about 2023 at the moment?
Well, in terms of the TV industry, I think it is, the launch of ad-supported Netflix and Disney, because I think that has the real potential to sort of, move the industry forward. And right now, there's still a lot of, lack of standardization is the easiest way to put it, that everybody sort of has their own way of doing, whether it's measurement, data, transparency, et cetera. And that when those guys come in and suddenly more money starts shifting, I think a lot of there's going to be a push from the big advertisers to say, hey, like, this is how we're doing it. Very similar in a way as to say what happened, I guess, probably about 30 years ago or so, when they sat down the digital publishers and said, okay, you need to come up with some standard banner sizes. It's just, we can't just keep making, bespoke banner sizes for every website out there. And so the same thing with TV. I think they're going to start saying, okay, this is how we're going to measure stuff. This is how, we're going to do data and all that. And, and again, as, Disney, HBO, Netflix, their ad-supported units ramp up, there is going to be, the sense that, okay, this is where TV is now, and that this is all of TV. It's not just like this, this sort of HBO-like product, but this is all of the TV.
Cool. Well, I look forward to continuing to consume your content and watching the industry evolve. And it sounds like you may actually have a role in deciding how it evolves. So that's super exciting.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.